When 9-year-old me found out that there was an action-adventure game where you play as a skeleton knight that rises from his own grave to kill zombies, demons, and frigging ghost pirates, I thought my head was gonna explode. This was probably the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. So I bought the game, or rather my mom did, and it was everything I hoped it was gonna be. Sure, by today's standards, the controls are a little clunky, the camera can be extremely frustrating, and the gameplay wasn't exactly revolutionary. But what really makes this game hold up even today, in my opinion, is the atmosphere. The art style is great, the humor is dark, and the music is memorable. And as you can see from the title of this video, the music is what we're here to talk about. Before we get to the soundtrack itself though, let's get into the background. The concept for MediEvil was simple, an action-adventure game deeply influenced by the style of Tim Burton movies, in particular The Nightmare Before Christmas. The parallels are clear, a quirky yet stylish Halloween-themed world with an unlikely hero, a walking, talking skeleton. And if you want to go full Tim Burton, you need Danny Elfman. So, the two composers, Paul Arnold and Andrew Barnabas, better known as Bob and Barn, were commissioned to compose a soundtrack, influenced by Elfman. Since this is the mid-90s and neither budget nor technology allowed for a real orchestra, the score was created using electronic synthesizers. If you're interested in this sort of thing, you can actually find a list of the tools and software used on the excellent MediEvil Wikia. With all that out of the way, let's finally get to the score itself. Even though the game can at times be pretty quirky and even cartoonish, the music takes itself seriously. The first word I think of when I listen to this score is gothic. No, not that kind of gothic. This kind of gothic. You know, the Victorian kind, with ruined castles and dark shadows and disturbed, brooding characters. There's a mystical quality to it, with a lot of bells and harps and woodwinds. It just sets the mood immediately. The music almost paints a picture, and it's really helped along by the great art direction. I always find when listening to music, whether it's pop music or soundtracks, that the visuals tend to inform the way I think about the music itself, whether it's an album cover or the art direction in a great video game. In MediEvil, there is a lot of mystic, diffused light, a lot of glowing purple and green and gold, and that's the way I visualize this music in my head when I hear it. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but my point is the visuals and the sound really work well together. As we get to the end of the game, the music becomes a bit more zany. Here the Elfman influence really shines through, especially that jumpy and slightly eccentric quality his scores always seem to have. But it still doesn't sound like someone imitating his music. It really has a voice of its own. Before we come to the conclusion, I'll briefly talk about my favorite tracks. There are more than 20 tracks on the OST and I like many of them, but I'll still try to limit myself to a few standout tracks. The centerpiece of the score is the Gallowmere Waltz. Right from the outset, with the deep bass, the plucked strings and the grating woodwinds, it has a certain quality. And then the brass melody really cements that quality. I also really like the Scarecrow Fields and the way it deftly switches between an understated, rushed and urgent sound and a more ominous and overwhelming full orchestra, complete with a ringing choir. The Sleeping Village, which is also played in the Enchanted Earth, is great in a different way. This track really sounds gloomy and oppressive, while still managing to be mystical in a more magical kind of way. And there are tons more. The boss theme, the time device, and the main menu theme are all great. My favorite, though, has to be the ending credits. I love how it slowly builds to this epic piece of music. I especially love this part. This to me represents everything that's great about the MediEvil soundtrack. The twisted fairy tale aspect of it, the serious tone of the music, despite its slightly absurd subject matter, and finally, well, it just sounds really awesome. You know, many modern scores are really great, really awesome, technically brilliant and a joy to listen to, but at the same time they can feel a bit soulless. They sound exactly like movie scores. This is different. It's just so atmospheric and dense. It really has its own identity. Even though I can hear the Elfman influence, it's far from derivative. It can be jaunty, lumbering, even slightly comic at one point, and then completely switch gears and become urgent or mysterious, all while still sounding like a singular vision. Of course, not everything is perfect. The quality is pretty bad, even by PlayStation 1 standards. There are many other game OSTs from this time that sound much more clear and crisp. But, and I know many of you were wondering when I was gonna bring this up, the soundtrack for the first remake, Resurrection on the PSP, and the second remake for the PS4 are both recorded using a live orchestra, and they sound amazing. If I had another criticism, it would be that some of the tracks go a bit overboard on the atmospheric side. Examples are the Ant Caves or the Hall of Heroes. Especially combined with the poor quality, it really just amounts to a lot of distorted white noise with a bit of doodling in between. Of course, I don't want to end this review on a negative note, because my opinion of this soundtrack is as far from negative as it could be. I think this is a brilliant score, and even though I usually tend to listen to the re-orchestrated versions nowadays, I still find myself coming back to this one all the time.